A lot of guys feel a sense of being an imposter. They feel a sense, they have a fear of being caught out, that people are going to realise that they're fakes. One thing that's interesting and helpful to know about this is that this is really, really common, and that a lot of people who succeed highly have this feeling. One example would be somebody who's come from nothing or had to work very hard to gain this. Those people will have often this sense of being an imposter, just as much as those who maybe had it a bit easier. So for one thing, it's helpful to recognise that this is actually really common. It's one of those funny things where, as a counsellor, I get paid in money, but I get paid in a lot of things. And one of the things I get paid in is that I start to see that these universal things in me and in other people are universal things, or they're general at least, they're very common. So it's got something more to do with being a human being. It's probably got something to do with the culture, it might have something to do with our gender in the context of a culture, in the context of evolutionary forces on us, whatever. But it's very common. It's statistically more common among men. There is research in this, but it's very common among men and women. So one thing you can do with this kind of fear or neurosis is be aware that it's a general human tendency. This is not about you. It feels like it's about you, and therefore it feels like the truth. When you become aware that it's not particular to you, that's really common, and it's common to a lot of people who you know aren't fakes, then you start to realise that this is a feeling rather than the truth. You can try and let that sink in. Okay, that's one point to make about that. Another point to make about it, I've sort of said I'll talk a lot about things like gratitude and so on, and I think they're really fundamental and basic and powerful. And so part of what goes on when we feel like imposters or fakes is that we're kind of lacking a sense of, we're lacking an appreciation of the way that things have just fallen together. Because things fall together, they fall together badly or they fall together well, and often they fall together well, and it's a surprise how well things can fall together, but they do. And so there's a kind of humility in liberating yourself from imposter syndrome. There's a kind of humility involved. It's in a sense that you realise this is not about you, and therefore the hard judgments that you make on yourself can be lifted. There's a kind of egotism in hating yourself. There's an egotism in judging yourself. And when you realise that things have fallen together in certain ways, an accident has placed you in this situation, and etc., etc., you start to realise this is not really about you, then you stop coming down so hard on yourself. Humility liberates you from self-loathing. It liberates you from egotism, but let's understand that egotism goes in both directions. It's both self-aggrandizement, grandiosity, but it's also self-loathing. At the core of self-loathing is egotism. I'm either the greatest or the worst. Well, no, I'm just an ordinary person. I've got some qualities, some of them are better and some of them are worse. I fell into this situation, it could have been somebody else, but it was me, here we are. Put my head down and do the thing. So, look, this is all coming off the top of my head, so there's probably a lot of things I could say and might say another time about this, but recognising that one, imposter syndrome, as I started calling it in this reflection, is really common. So it's not about the truth, it's a feeling that sits inside a lot of people. It's detached from truth. It's not telling you something about yourself, it's not giving you information about yourself, it's a feeling. Number one, that. Number two, the beautiful thing is that kind of humility is precisely what can liberate you from this. So recognising that it's a kind of egotism that leads us to judge ourselves, hate ourselves, feel insecure about ourselves. And when we can kind of just let go of ourselves and accept the randomness of life, and accept the kind of mediocre mixture that we are, of sort of better traits and worse traits and average traits, when we can kind of just accept that, And I guess in both cases here, we're putting ourselves into the mix of human beings. I'm not superior to them, nor am I worse. I'm just one more human being among a mix of us, in the milieu, the mixture of us. When you do that, then it liberates you from this very toxic kind of emotion, but also self-perception. And that's pretty important. Yeah.